Next up is Brigadier General Matt Braman, the Director of Army Aviation on the Army staff. Matt.
Thanks. All right, I'm on. Everybody hears me. All right, great. So I'm usually billed as the guy to talk about what's going on in DA and in DC, and since there's absolutely nothing going on in those two places, I figured I'd start off with a story first. So in December of 2005, I was a young captain in the 160th at Kandahar Airfield. We had a small detachment. This was the first year of the war, and so there was no green bean coffee. Things like that didn't exist. It was pretty barren. So we cooked our own meals because we flew all night and slept all day, and it didn't coincide with the battle rhythm of most of the other base. And then one day, I was tasked to not fly that night, so I was cooking. And this guy from the USO shows up and says, "Hey, there's this singer here that provided a show for everybody and sang for the base, but you guys weren't available. He was in the Army. He served some time in special operations, and he wanted to go meet some special operators. Can he come by your camp tonight while you guys are cooking dinner and hang out with you guys?" And we said, "Why not?" So this country singer shows up. He brings his drummer with a set of bongos. He's got his acoustic guitar player. And he said, "Hey, what do you guys want to hear?" And for 2 hours, he just sang any song we asked him to sing. That guy is going to play for us tomorrow night, Craig Morgan. And that was 23 years ago. Pretty awesome. So I'm looking forward to seeing him tomorrow. All right, before I get into my formal remarks, thank Quad A for once again holding an awesome professional forum. I mean, this is our forum, and certainly with no shortage of challenges in the Army and in Army aviation, this is our place to come together and solve those pieces. So thanks for the continued leadership from you, and I also want to acknowledge our industry partners, most of which are downstairs doing their role, but without question, we can't evolve and be relevant in today's environment without our industry partners. And for those of you who don't know, in our office in 3 Alpha 474 in the Pentagon, the door is open to not only industry, it's open to our allies and partners, and it's open to our soldiers, all of which need something to be delivered to them. And we're the one place that can synchronize that effort across the Army. We don't control a lot, we do control a little, but the power of Army aviation is one. There's 6 different entities, that's why I have a six-pack. And somebody's got to synchronize that effort, and I've got a phenomenal team that does that in our office. So I'm going to introduce those guys as well, because the challenges that come forward, they're the ones that are going to navigate for this next year. And so I don't know if they're all in the room right now, but Kevin Easter, Colonel Kevin Easter, he's going to be a brigade commander next summer. He's the deputy at DAMO AV and will be the transition as I depart this summer. But there's no other colonel in Army aviation that has the exposure in the E-ring than Kevin does, and he speaks with authority and he speaks with knowledge when he talks directly to senior leaders, whether that be the secretary, whether that be the chief, the vice, and the 3. And so it's great to keep him on another year. And for those of you who don't know, our number 8 Command Chief Warrant Officer of the branch, John Koziel, is our Chief of Staff. And talk about a win for the team to keep somebody of that caliber, or to get somebody of that caliber to serve in the Pentagon. And he has instant credibility with the E-ring as well. I mean, people just say, "Go get me Kaz." And he goes to the E-ring and he answers questions. We've got Brian Merkel, Colonel Brian Merkel, who's second year in DAMO AV, just selected to command the 10th Aviation Brigade. So next summer he'll leave to go command that brigade. And he has taken, although I wasn't directed him this way, he was going to be our MOD division chief, and he said, "Hey, I want to dive in and take UAS." And so that's a pretty big deal for one of our top commanders, future commanders, to say, "I want to tackle this problem set for the Army." And that's a result of last year when we started to transform and see the capabilities of unmanned systems. The G3 directed that an 06 directorate in DAMO AV exist. And so Rick Poland, who's here somewhere as well, he jumped on that grenade. He's getting ready to go command a brigade this summer. You see a theme. We got these high quality aviators coming into the office, high performers, and they're going to command organizations in our Army. But Rick took that on, and he's probably the smartest guy outside of the PM office on unmanned systems and all the impacts they have across the force. Then you got Tony Marston, selected to command the largest aviation brigade in the Army, the 101st. He is taking over Ops and Readiness Division, but he's the guy that is driving this transformation process right now. He started off with just doing TIC, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but he is the one down there with Fort Novosel ensuring that we can get what the chief wants in a rapid manner so we actually get the benefits out of it. And Tony's doing an awesome job. We left him at home because there's a lot of work to be done. And then Ray Santiago, who's leaving as our mod chief, has done a phenomenal job on the platform side to make sure that our soldiers get the platforms they need and the interaction with our program management offices to ensure that everybody has what they need. And then a couple more. Scott Slider, who's sitting over here. He's right down in front. He's our Command Chief Warrant Officer. He's the standardization officer for the Army. That's the role he fills inside of DAMO AV, and he's just selected to be the 11th Branch Command Chief Warrant Officer, and so he'll leave this summer, or imminently, to go assume that position, somehow outdo Mike Casero. I don't know if that's possible, but he's going to try. And we're ending up getting Bob Phillips out of the 101st Airborne Division, who's going to be that standardization officer. And he's knee-deep right now in figuring out how to do 50 aircraft on the National Mall as a flyover of the Army's birthday. And that's going to be a pretty epic event going on here in a couple of weeks. So that's the team. And then my Sergeant Majors, I can't leave him out, my battle buddy. And we didn't always have a Sergeant Major in DAMO AV. He's number 2. Mike Telesco is 1, Ruben's number 2. We realize that we make a lot of plans up in the building, and a lot of them don't survive contact because we don't have competent NCOs there to carry the mail for our soldiers. And Ruben is no one finer to speak on what it means, what these decisions have, what the impacts have on our force, and he's always out there advocating, and we know the Army's got big plans for him as he leaves DAMO AV. So as I said a couple minutes ago, I'm going to talk about a couple things. I'll hit op-tempo, what we've done this last year briefly, and these will be I'll cover the topics with a couple points and move on to the next, some more than others. But you're going to hear from the experts. You're going to hear from Major General Robinson tomorrow. You're going to hear from David Phillips tomorrow, and CFT, who own the preponderance of these activities, but we synchronize them, and I want to cover them as things that are extremely important in the building. So let's talk op-tempo for the first thing. So actually, before I go to op-tempo, the good news is I'm super synced with my boss, the aviation branch chief, and so he stole my quote yesterday from Shinseki because nothing sums up where we're going better than that quote. So my crack team of speechwriters said, go out and find me the equivalent of the Shinseki quote, and he said, this one's from John Maxwell. It says, change is inevitable, but growth is optional. Like, we've got to grow. We've got to take this change, grow with it, to deliver what the ground force commanders need, and I think we can do that. And that team that I just described to you is the one that's going to do it over this next year. So op-tempo, no change in commitments for the Army. Despite the fact it sounds like we're shrinking, it sounds like you don't see, you don't hear about repetitive deployments of cabs like we were in the high time of the global war on terrorism. The fact remains is 8 out of 12 of our cabs are committed every single day to missions. That's 3 in Indo-PACOM, 1's assigned on the pen, 2 others assigned within Indo-PACOM doing that mission exclusively. We've got a forward-based cab with a 12 cab in Europe doing that mission, the deter mission, every day. And we've got a rotational cab there as well to extend the reach and capability of our aviation soldiers and for deterrence. And then we've got our cab in CENTCOM still, and sometimes people forget that. I know the guys that don't forget that is that one infantry brigade that's on the ground that relies solely on them for mobility, sustainment, and survivability. And so 8 of 12, and the other 4, 2 of them are coming back from those deployments and 2 are getting ready to go. So there is no change in demand. And so as we shrink the force to optimize it, and I'll talk about that a little with ATI, it highlights the need for our partnership with Compo 2 in particular, the things that you're going to provide and the flexibility you're going to give us to sustain that capability, and we're going to need you. And so we'll talk about future ATI, what that means to the total force as we go forward. But in the meantime, we know we can be successful because we've got competent partners in our Compo 2 that'll level the playing field and provide capabilities when we can. All right. And I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight, while talking about them, the incredible work that our National Guard and Reserve forces did this past year when we're talking about national disasters, DISCA support, whether it was floods, hurricanes, wildfires. Other than, I think you guys did about half as much as what General Cody did himself with his Loach, but you guys did some incredible things, especially in North Carolina. I mean, we're talking over 3,000 hours executed in support of DISCA, rescued 750 people, transported over 2,400 individuals out of harm's way, moved 2,100 tons of cargo, and you dropped off more than 2.5 million gallons of water to folks in need. And you did it within hours of notification. And that just proves how important you guys are to the total Army and to America. And that doesn't include the things you did in preparation for your wartime mission, which is secondary to that. So I appreciate that. Talking about transformation, ATI, it's 2 weeks old. Some of this we're building in flight. You notice no slides, because the minute you put it on a slide, it's probably irrelevant because we're moving that fast. But here's what we do know about ATI. The concept itself, we've been talking about this internal to our office and with senior leaders for most of this past year. How do we divest legacy equipment and optimize our force within the constraints we have? Now, we're going to do that through the context of divesting 11 headquarters. But what we're going to do is look at those individuals that are assigned to those headquarters and that equipment that's not old, i.e. we have way more than 11 squadrons worth of Delta models. How do we reinvest those platforms and those capabilities into the existing force? And so what you're going to see is units that were 75% manned or 80% manned go into 110% manned. We're going to see units that were traditionally equipped with 24 or less aircraft, potentially going up to 30 aircraft. We've got a deliberate commitment from Army senior leaders to invest the maintainers from those 11 squadrons back into the force. We won't be able to keep all of them, but we're going to change the MTOs of the way we've been doing maintenance for really decades in ratios of maintainers to aircraft, make the change on the documents, and reinvest those forces, those individuals, into the force so we can excel at operational tempo of our aircraft and our operational readiness rates. And there's a commitment from that, and so part of this process is figuring out how to get all that done here in a rapid manner. And so there's a lot that's going to happen. But what it's going to do, it's going to enable us to then have fully manned formations that can actually get after training, do the things they need to do to be ready for their warfighting tasks, still allow people to go to schools, not at the detriment of your organizations, and allows us to pool our talented resources of instructor pilots and maintainers into less formations for higher density capability. But at some point, we're going to have to shrink as well. We know that. But that's also an opportunity to transform. As we look at Flight School Next, and General Gill talked a little bit about it yesterday, and it'll probably come up in other discussions, there's a cost to transferring sometimes. But there's also a need for us to probably slow the tap down on what goes in while we transform, and it'll have minimum or no effect on the operational force, which is a good thing. So we have to take advantage of the opportunity to do those things in a rapid manner, and the payoff will be back to the aviation force. Okay, the next thing, transforming contact. You've heard the term. For those who aren't savvy on it, that's our method to rapidly get technology and look at force design updates with the existing force. And we started with 2 brigades. In the 10th Mountain Division and the 101st. And now we've gone to 2 divisions. We're expanding it to the National Guard. And from the National Guard, it'll go also into our soft forces as well. And so those are units that will get new kit into their hands, find out what works. We double down on the things that do, and we divest the things that don't work and move on, and doing that in a rapid manner. And that will build the capability of what we leverage to the rest of the force. But what are we doing for TIC in aviation? So there are a couple things specifically. Next order went out earlier this year. We looked at 3 principal areas we wanted to really go after in TIC. And the first one was really the divisional reconnaissance capability. And so looking holistically, how does the Aviation Brigade aid in that reconnaissance, the total reconnaissance capabilities of the division? Obviously, we're not going to do that with the CAV Squadron anymore. That was the test bed, is how do we do a reduced manned capability and pair it with multiple levels of unmanned systems to give a holistic capability to do division reconnaissance. And so we'll do that in the attack battalions. We're talking, maneuver companies of whatever the brigade DR is, whatever the division reconnaissance capabilities are, whether that's Grey Eagle now and whatever's next. Those will reside in that formation. And we're going to test that and see how it operates. One, get rid of excess structure of separate companies, put it under a brigade's existing battalion's formation, and execute it and put it to the test and let us make decisions. That's the first thing we're looking at. Second one really is sustainment. Like, how do we sustain in large-scale combat operations in the current environment? I like to tell people there's a lot of lessons to be learned from Ukraine, but we're not the Ukrainian army and we're not the Russian army. We're going to fight differently. But there are things to be learned from that. And what we do know is you're going to be under constant stare. People are going to know where your stuff is. So if you're close to the FLOT and even in close proximity, somebody's going to know where you're at. So how do we sustain an aviation force, maximize its lethality and its capabilities without losing our sustainment in the same event? So we're asking units to look at that. How do we do that? That's displaced formations, small quantities, hidden places. How do you bring maintenance to that? How do you get back to maintenance and do it in a place that's survivable? And we're going to ask units to do that through our CTC rotations and other ways that have not been traditional in the past. And the last one really is Next Gen C2. I'll go back to sustainment, sorry. I missed the most important part is the FARP aspect of that. So we've gotten very comfortable with forward support companies in our organic formations that work really well when you're on a FOB in a permissive or semi-permissive environment. We've asked units now to look at how do we train specifically the task of refueling aircraft in a place where you might have 15 minutes to do it and you've got to leave again. And that's not the same guys that fill up the generators at your TOC back in the rear or deliver water. These are specifically trained formations that do nothing but refuel aircraft, rearm aircraft in a contested environment and have the skills as well as the protection capabilities to survive and do that. And we've got to train that as a core task, not as a secondary task. So that's being tasked to units to do that as well. And then lastly is our Next Gen C2. We've already started the kind of the experimentation with the 101st Airborne Division, federated systems of taking ground radios, incorporating them into our platforms, and where we'd always like to be integrated capability, this is one area where I think federated is going to be faster. It's going to provide us the capability we need to talk to our ground force commanders and move out. So that's everything with TIC right now, and you'll see that'll continue to evolve. I mentioned earlier on the panel, we'll talk about the proliferation of small UAS and the role aviation plays. I mean, just looking at the vast numbers. Right now, 1,600 systems at the SRR, so small range reconnaissance capabilities, think platoon capability. 1,600 systems already out on the battlefield. We'll get to 2,400 systems by the end of next year. That's a lot of systems flying around the battle space. Our company DR, which will feed our medium range reconnaissance kind of requirements, we've already done that in smaller quantities. The 10th Mountain Division employed 14 of those systems in their recent rotation to Europe to really test how they survive, how they operate, and they learned a lot of lessons from there. 101st got 14 systems, and the 25th ID has got another 10 systems. And that will help us determine what that MRR capability is going to be in the future. But those are a lot more things out there doing a lot of things. And then it was mentioned earlier, the brigade director requirement. They've already done the testing and the runoff, and we'll have a decision here shortly with the fielding here in the first quarter of FY26. And that's really what you think conceptually, that was what you were getting out of your shadows before. Get those to the TIC units, learn lessons, and then double down on the ones that work and move out on them going forward. And some of the other things within UAS capabilities, a lot of feedback we're getting from the ground force. Everything that flies has an AWR, and in some cases that's a clunky process that has taken a long time to do. General Robinson and her team, especially working with SRD, we now have blanket AWRs for our Group 1 and Group 2 systems, which allows tremendous amount of flexibility for ground force commanders to modify them, to take pieces that they generate from their own production capabilities and employ them on those systems within a pretty broad constraint and allow them to operate without having to go back and ask for permission. And that is going to accelerate our ability to proliferate those capabilities for our ground force commanders. And so the next thing is how do we get to Group 3 and who's going to man Group 3? Obviously, at the end of the day, we want to get to a place where same controller controls everything, and any qualified operator, not necessarily MOS qualified, but trained soldier can employ systems of different capabilities. And those are out there, and we're working through that process of where that's going to be. And in that process of the small UASs, I can't underestimate the value of our 15 Echoes and 15 Whiskeys, who kind of came out of a job for a period of time and now are leading the effort to how to integrate those systems at the platoon level. Think of them almost as the fire direction officers and FDCs and FDOs in the units, controlling airspace, educating about airspace, and employing things in. And that leads me into what the next kind of effort is how do you manage that airspace with all those things flying? Now, there's a procedural piece of that, and there's a technical piece of that. And the CFT, Colonel Sweeney will talk about it tomorrow a little bit, they're leading the effort, the sprint forward, to ensure that we have a way to do that. And that's also incorporating into our future mission planning program. So things like NICS that 160th is using now, how does that aid in the management of airspace, not just the physical management of iron and plastic flying around, but the electromagnetic spectrum portion of that too. How is that managed so we can operate going forward? And that is a huge effort. All right, FLRAA. I'll talk a little bit more about this in depth. So we're going to accelerate. And so my good friend David Phillips, he and I spent a lot of time talking about that because he's got to develop it. And my sole role in life is to get it in the hands of soldiers and employ it faster. The chief wants it faster, we want it faster, and ground force commanders want it faster. And so we have a constant dialogue about current procedures and policies and the way we've done business, and how do we accelerate that to ensure that we deliver this capability, game-changing capability, faster. And so we're asking him to do a lot of things that are going to make him uncomfortable, and that's a good thing, I think. I've told him, like, as soon as we have a safe envelope with XPs and our Bell test pilots, we're not going to wait till LUT to put that first unit equipped, those pilots in those aircraft. We want them side by side with the XPs on day one, a portion of those folks. And as soon as there's a safe envelope, we're going to put them in there and get their assessment and move them back out. And that LUT's going to really occur from article delivery number 1 until number 8. It's a constant piece. Crew chiefs assigned to that PM team, not from the PM office, from the first unit equipped, that are over the shoulder watching things from day one, so they're developing procedures that they can use and be effectiveness. And that's got to happen. It can't be we wait for it to be delivered and we get a certain touch point here and then you live with it. To evolve faster, we've got to incorporate those folks early on, and we're working through how to do that. How do we get the expertise for tilt rotor? We have no experience in this in the Army, so we've already done a couple things initially. We sent some of our future operational development team folks to get a familiarization with the CV-22 in the Marine Corps, and that was a FAM, so they got 5 hours of simulator time and said, here's an introduction. That's not good enough. We've talked about it, but that's the first step. Our goal is to put seasoned warrant officers, those who are destined to be in that first unit equipped, through the full course of the CV-22 in an operational assignment with the Marine Corps, potentially the Air Force, and the Navy, to build that expertise. So 2 years later, after a 2-year utilization tour, they come back and they lead the effort in the operational development team, and they're those first instructor pilots and those first flight leads and those first maintenance pilots assigned to that first unit. And so that's a game changer. The Marine Corps is all on board to do this, and they've got their needs as well. They would say, we'll do this right now for non-reciprocal. But when you guys start to field your aircraft, we want to put a Marine in your formation and do the same thing, because we see this is the next generation capability that we have to go after. And so that's pretty exciting. While that's going on, we're already standing up the operational development team at Fort Rucker. Think about 32 pilots of various flavors, 32 maintainers, and their job is to, in parallel, develop how we're going to employ this capability as soon as we can get our hands on it in order to prep for the first unit to be equipped. And that part of that acceleration is we're not waiting for 8 aircraft to do IoT and E. That was the plan, and that's traditionally been a plan. You get a number of aircraft, you put them through their paces at scale. We've got to be decisive in getting a decision to full rate production. And that means when we've got 2 aircraft and a spare, we're starting to do IoT and E. We're training the crews. They're going to be a part of that process with the test articles. Get those initial crews trained, do IoT and E, get the decision, so when number 8 LRIP comes off the line, number 9 production model, number 1 is right behind it, and that's the only way we're going to get this to the force fast enough to be relevant. And we can do that. We can do that in FY28 if we stay focused and we're ready. So lots going on in the FLRAA world beyond just the decision to accelerate, but a lot of work to be done as well. I'll talk readiness for LISCO, and so if the cab commanders are in here and other aviation leaders that are in the current force. I'll talk about safety in a second, but we've got to demonstrate the capabilities that I know you have at scale within our formations. And so some of that means thinking in different ways that we've done business. And some of you are doing this already, and I'm appreciative of that, but as I look at formations, I just left the 10th Mountain Division, and they're doing great things. But in terms of LISCO capability, trying to find companies that could do company-level ops routinely, it's hard, because a quarter of that company, if not half of it's in some kind of RL progression. New people coming in, people retiring, people moving, right? So we got 3 companies all battling the same thing. I think I need commanders to think through problem sets differently. How do I fill A company with nothing but RO1 pilots ready to do mission training at Echelon? And when that's filled, you fill up B company, and the rest go to C company and train until they're ready to assume the fight. And we demonstrate capability at Echelon. That is the one thing we're not able to do routinely across the entire force, is show our leaders that other than once a year at a CTC, that we can routinely perform large-scale operations with our forces at Echelon. And that's your charge, is to figure that out. So commanders, you have the authorities to do those things. How you do it, I ask you to look at innovative ways to get there. But that's the key to being relevant, is showing that we can not only just provide teams and platoon level capabilities, but battalion, company battalion operations. And we're here to help you. But that's the direction we need to go. I was talking about the employment of how we integrate things like launched effects into that process. That's going to be key, because although there is that perception that a helicopter won't survive anywhere in the battlefields these days, we know that's not true, but there are windows that we can maximize, and using launched effects and UAS and other capabilities in electromagnetic spectrum is going to be key to that, and we've got to incorporate that early on, and that's something we're just not comfortable with because we haven't done it in years. We haven't had an electronic warfare officer in the style we used to have in a long time that has been able to have the tools, and launched effects and other capabilities are going to allow those units to do that training and move forward. And so need your help there as well. And then to conclude, as you go to your operational design, your CTCs, remember, it's your CTC rotation. Within constraints, your leadership has pretty broad flexibility in designing your rotation. And we've got to get out of the business of just supporting a BCT in the traditional manner. We've got to drive, how do we make that an aviation training rotation to get after the things we must do to survive? And that may not look like what the ground force, in fact, it shouldn't look anything like what the ground force is doing. We're talking you basing 100 miles away every day and flying into the box routinely, but having presence forward in those survivability nodes, whether they be FARPs, C2 elements, and whatnot. So I need your help there too. All right, I'll hit safety real quick. We're getting close on time here. 2023, 2024, extremely elevated, probably our 2 worst years in decades. In fact, I know they were. We did a couple of things. One, we did initial stand down, didn't really solve the problem, and the chief asked us to look at another method to recage the force, and we initiated last summer the first aviation stand up. And what we did was 3 real things. One, we wanted to inform the force of what the problems and challenges that we know exist and what we're doing about it. Think Taylor gearbox or improved Taylor drivetrain for the Apache, improved Taylor paddles, so those types of things. What are we doing, where are we at, so forces understand where it's coming. And then we also wanted to educate, like, here are processes, here are TSPs, things that we can deliver to the force that can educate you to compensate for lack of experience and take talented people and work through how we're going to go operate safely. And so, and the last one was we wanted feedback from the force. So we asked at echelon, I want squad leaders and soldiers, maintainers to give us feedback to the Army. What are we not doing for you to be able to operate safely? And we want it from your company grade officers, and we want it from your warrant officers. And so we took the feedback as well, and that went straight to the vice and the chief of staff of the Army. They wanted that piece in particular. So leveraging that, we've already established this is as a new annual event. The chief said, let's do it once a year. So X order's out, for most of you know this. 1 June, you'll have 90 days to complete it. But we're going to give you the tools. So this is not going to be a burden on the organization. Here's what we suggest you use to educate your force. We want that same feedback, and we'll give you an update on the things that are going on within the aviation enterprise. And so far, we've seen a drastic reduction since last year in total accidents. You've done a great job, and so I commend the commanders out here. It's about having leaders involved, making sure we're mitigating risk, doing all the things that we expect you to do, but it's a relentless responsibility. If you take your eye off the ball for 1 minute, it could be detrimental, but you're doing a fabulous job of this, and so we want to continue to see that sustainment. But I can't not address, we've had one significant accident, and this is a watershed event for Army aviation, and so it's dominated kind of my office's life since January 29th, and I say this not because of anything other than you're under the microscope right now. Every aviator that flies, every aircraft flies, it doesn't matter if you're nearly perfect, there's a heightened sense that the Army's not doing things correctly. So things are going to happen. We're going to cover you. We're going to watch your back, but we got to be hyper vigilant that we're doing the right thing always, because there's very little. You're going to be on the national news in a heartbeat for doing something that never would have been of consequence before. And so I need your vigilance as commanders to look at not only not only assessing risk, but really it's about mitigating risk. How are commanders actively, not just saying, well, it's a high risk, so that guy's to sign it. What are we doing to mitigate it to the most extent possible? And some of the things we found out of the initial investigation, certainly this is a long-going process. NTSB's got lead on it, but the Army is invested as well from our side, from our safety investigations and our collateral investigations. what's coming to the field as a result. 1,600 systems have been purchased for ADS-B in capability that will go on your tablets in your aircraft. The PM office has cut the contract, and those will go to organizations that have the highest volume in high-risk areas, thinking people that operate around Class B airspace routinely, but really we want to get out to the entire force. A lot of units have these in small quantities already. We owe it to you to get these systems in your hands, your soldiers, so you have the best situational awareness available. And so that's coming. We'll see what happens here in July. We're going to have a very public hearing with the NTSB where all players involved in this accident are going to come to the table and talk about filling the gaps and what happened. And I said, to my knowledge to this date, we haven't found a single thing that's negligent, but that isn't the narrative that's out there. So I need your assistance as aviators and professionals to do the right thing, train your forces, and mitigate the risk. So we have the flexibility to continue to serve and operate in the airspace. There are those out there that want to take that away from you, and it's not good for the nation, but they're in a hard place. So I need your assistance there, and we'll continue to go forward. All right, the last thing I want to do is, it's kind of, it was really awesome. We having those guys from Task Force Normandy up here, and I didn't know about it either, so it was a surprise to me, but guys like General Cody, I mean, the branch chief said it best, like, when we came in the Army, we wanted to be that guy. We wanted to be the person that flew deep into enemy territory, pulled the trigger, and opened up the gate for the Joint Force. And I've heard those stories for 3 decades, coming to Quad A as a professional aviator. And I heard it before that as a dependent coming to these things. But I also want people to remember we had 20 years of conflict with some incredible soldiers that did some incredible things. And I want to start introducing some of those folks into the narrative again. Because we're a people business, it's important to our nation, and people, there's no, like I said, there's no such thing as, there are no such thing as not people in unmanned systems, right? There's a people involved in all this, and the Army's a people force. So I want to think about, and these are all folks I asked my team to research, find me some heroes from the GWAT that I don't know anything about. And so there's CW3 then, Jerry Sarton. He was flying his Black Hawk, took an RPG hit, aircraft crashed, he evacuated his crew under fire, made contact with another aircraft unassociated with his mission, and while loading them into the Chinook, engaged the enemy at close combat with his own personal weapon to ensure that they got on the airplane. Received Distinguished Flying Cross. I had never heard that story. I don't even know what unit it is, but what an incredible example of an Army aviator. CW2 Jonathan Harris navigated enemy fire, engaged insurgents to protect his team as a flight lead flying a Black Hawk, a UH-60 Lima Black Hawk, putting himself in harm's way to ensure that those guys could get extracted. We've got CW3, a good friend of mine, and they pulled this game up randomly, but CW3 then, Chris Palumbo, he was from the Blue Stars. Again, a Black Hawk pilot, seeing a ground force in need. I don't know how many holes are in that aircraft, but they were in the hundreds. He placed the aircraft multiple times between the ground force and the enemy, extracted them. He was awarded the Silver Star back in those days, and it wasn't a surprise, and it was, a couple years back, it was upgraded to the Distinguished Service Cross. Like, talk about great examples for our young soldiers to follow. And then Matt Whirl and Jamie Weeks, two folks I served alongside with. And so Matt Whirl and I went to flight school together. Cam, his wife's a good friend, and I see his sons all the time that are proud that their dad was a Night Stalker. And Jamie, I didn't know as well, but Jamie's dad, Jimmy Weeks, was my instructor pilot at Fort Rucker as a primary student in 1995. And he used to tell me about his son in this special unit at Fort Campbell, and if you're good enough, maybe one day you can be a part of that. And so I bring those two up in particular because yesterday was the anniversary of their sacrifice as they routinely, in daylight, to keep an entrenched insurgency force off of our special operators, made routine runs until shot down by a shoulder-fired weapon. And so we are a people business. We got great heroes, and they're sitting in this audience right now, and they're going to do this for the Army no matter what the design of our force looks like. And I look forward to serving alongside each and every one of you, and I give all my time back to you, sir. Thank you.